They sold her on a winter morning so cold that even the crows were silent. The frost clung to the bamboo fence outside her parents' house like pale fingers, and the smoke rising from the hearth curled weakly into the grey sky, as if ashamed to be seen. Méline stood barefoot on the packed dirt floor, her toes numb. Her thin cotton dress patched so many times it barely resembled its original color. She was 22 years old, but the years had not been kind. Hard labor, hunger, and whispered shame had hollowed her eyes and bent her shoulders forward, as though she were already apologizing for existing. Her mother would not look at her. She kept her gaze fixed on the cracked clay bowl in her hands, rubbing its rim again and again with her thumb, even though it was already clean. Her father stood near the door, arms folded, jaw clenched, staring outside as if waiting for someone, or something, to end this quickly. No one said the word infertile, but it hung in the air heavier than the smoke, heavier than the cold. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of herbs, prayers, doctors, needles, humiliating examinations and cruel neighbors. 3 years and no child. That was all it took for a woman's worth to evaporate. The man who had married her had returned her like spoiled goods. He hadn't even been cruel about it. That hurt the most. He simply said flatly that his family needed heirs, and she had failed. When she came back to her parents' house, carrying her small bundle of clothes, the village women stopped greeting her. Children stared. Men whispered. Her parents' food stores were already thin, and every bowl she ate felt like theft. So when the broker arrived, wrapped in a thick fur-lined coat, his cheeks red from the cold, her parents did not argue long. "She's strong," the broker said, looking Méline up and down like livestock. "Quiet, obedient, she will work hard." "She can't bear children," her father said stiffly, as if confessing a crime. The broker shrugged. "Not every man needs more mouths." That was how the price was set. Lower than a bride. Lower than a servant, just enough silver to keep her parents alive through the winter. Méline did not cry when the money changed hands. She had already cried all her tears in the months before, alone at night, biting her sleeve so no one would hear. Now she simply bowed once, deeply, the way a dutiful daughter should. Her mother finally looked up then, eyes red and swollen, lips trembling. "Live," her mother whispered. It was not comfort. It was an order. The journey took 2 days. The broker spoke little, and Méline learned quickly not to ask questions. They traveled by cart through forests that grew thicker and darker. The farther they went, the air smelling of pine sap and damp earth. The trees rose tall and endless, their branches creaking softly, like old men whispering secrets. She had never been this far from her village. On the second evening, the cart stopped near a clearing. Smoke rose from a small cabin nestled among towering trees. The place looked isolated. No village, no neighbors, just forest in every direction. The sound of an axe echoed faintly, rhythmic and steady. "That's him," the broker said. Méline's heart began to pound, not from fear alone, but from the unknown. A lonely place like this meant loneliness of another kind. A man who lived this far from others was either gentle or dangerous. The man emerged from between the trees just as the broker called out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair streaked with grey at the temples. His coat was worn but clean, patched carefully. His hands were large, scarred, the hands of someone who worked hard and often alone. His face was lined, not old but tired, deeply tired. 4 children appeared behind him, peeking out like wary animals. Méline noticed them immediately. A boy of about 12 stood protectively in front, jaw set too tight for someone so young. A girl with braided hair clutched his sleeve. Behind them were 2 smaller children, a boy and a girl, both thin, both watching with wide, uncertain eyes. The man wiped his hands on his trousers and approached. His gaze went first to the broker, then to Méline. He did not leer. He did not smile. He simply looked carefully, thoughtfully, like someone weighing not a purchase, but a responsibility. "This is her," the broker said. "Name's Méline. She cooks, cleans, works fields if needed." "And the condition?" the man asked quietly. The broker hesitated. "She can't have children." Silence followed. The forest seemed to hold its breath. The man looked back at his children. Then he nodded once. "That's fine." Milin felt something strange then, confusion, sharp and sudden. She had braced herself for disgust, for rejection, for another negotiation over her failure. Instead, there was only acceptance, simple, almost indifferent. The silver exchanged hands. The broker left quickly, eager to be gone before nightfall. And just like that, Malin belonged to this place. The man introduced himself as Ethan Hale. Though his accent marked him as a foreigner who had settled here long ago, he did not touch her. He did not order her. He simply gestured toward the cabin. "Come inside," he said. "It's warm." Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and soup. The space was small but orderly. Beds lined one wall. A table stood in the center, scarred with use. Malin noticed how the children watched her, not with hostility, but with fear. Fear of replacement. Fear of change. Ethan poured her a bowl of soup before serving himself or the children. "Eat," he said. She hesitated. In her parents' home, she had learned to eat last. Ethan noticed. His brow furrowed slightly. "You eat with us?" Something in his tone, firm but not unkind, made her obey. As she lifted the spoon, her hands trembled. Not from cold this time, but from something she did not dare name. Hope was dangerous. Hope had betrayed her before. That night, she lay on a narrow bed near the wall, listening to the forest sounds outside, and the quiet breathing of 4 children nearby. She expected fear to keep her awake. Instead, exhaustion dragged her under, and for the first time in years, no one whispered her failure into the dark. Morning came softly in the forest, not with bells or voices, but with the hush of wind through pine needles and the distant knock of an axe splitting wood. Malin woke before anyone else, her body trained by years of rising early to earn her keep. For a few seconds she did not remember where she was. The low wooden ceiling, the faint scent of sap and smoke, the unfamiliar breathing around her. Then the memories returned all at once, heavy and sharp. She was no longer a daughter, no longer a wife. She was something in between, bought but not claimed, taken in but not yet accepted. She sat up quietly, careful not to wake the children. The smallest girl, barely 4, had kicked off her blanket in the night, her thin arms wrapped around nothing. Malin hesitated, then gently pulled the blanket back over her. The child stirred but did not wake. That small act sent an unexpected ache through Malin's chest. She had imagined doing this once, for a child of her own. The thought tightened her throat, but she swallowed it down. This house was not a place for such thoughts. She moved to the hearth and began to prepare breakfast using what little she found. Dried cornmeal, a handful of beans soaking in water, and a heel of bread wrapped in cloth. She worked silently, instinctively, as though usefulness might be the only language she had left. When Ethan came in from outside carrying firewood, he paused in the doorway. The smell of cooking filled the cabin, warmer than the fire itself. He watched her for a moment unseen, noting how she kept her head lowered, how her movements were careful, economical. She did not hum. She did not sigh. She worked like someone who expected to be corrected at any moment. The children woke gradually. The eldest boy, Samuel, was the first to sit up. His eyes immediately found Malin. He stiffened. "Pa," he said quietly but firmly. "She's still here." Ethan set the firewood down. "She lives here now." Samuel's jaw tightened. He was 12, but grief had aged him. His mother had died 2 winters earlier, taken by fever in less than a week. Since then, he had learned to watch everything closely, to guard what little stability remained. "She's not our ma," he said. "I know," Ethan replied. Malin turned from the hearth and bowed slightly, instinctively. "I will not replace anyone," she said softly. Her accent bent the words, but her meaning was clear. "I will only help." Samuel did not answer. He simply turned away. At the table, the younger children were quieter. Clara, the braided girl of about 9, watched Malin with cautious curiosity. The 6-year-old boy, Thomas, stared openly, spoon frozen halfway to his mouth. "Little..." Ruth smiled once, shyly, before hiding behind Clara's arm. Malin served everyone first, then sat only after Ethan nodded. She ate slowly, making herself small, trying not to take too much. She felt every glance, every silence. She understood this kind of room. It was the same as her parents'. house after she returned, full of unspoken calculations about worth and burden. After breakfast, she began cleaning without being asked. She swept the floor, wiped the table, folded blankets. She washed clothes in cold water until her fingers burned, then hung them neatly by the fire. When she finished, she stepped outside to gather fallen branches. Even though the forest was unfamiliar and vast, Ethan watched from a distance. He did not stop her, but something in her relentless motion unsettled him. She worked as if stopping meant danger. By afternoon, the children were restless. Winter days were long when there was little to do. Samuel took an axe and headed toward the woodpile. "I can help," Malin said quickly, stepping toward him. He stopped, turned. His eyes were sharp. "You don't need to." "I am strong," she said. "I worked fields." He hesitated, then handed her smaller logs without meeting her eyes. They worked in silence, the rhythmic thud of the axe echoing between trees. Malin split carefully, her movements precise. She had learned long ago that doing something well was safer than doing it fast. When she misjudged one strike and the axe glanced off, Samuel flinched as if struck himself. "Careful," he snapped. She bowed her head. "I'm sorry." Something in her voice, too quick, too practiced, made him pause. He said nothing more. Later, as the sun dipped low, Malin heard raised voices from inside the cabin. She froze, heart racing, every muscle tightening. Arguments always ended badly. She stood outside, clutching a bundle of wood, waiting for a summons. But the voice was Clara's, not Ethan's. "She's sleeping in Ma's spot," Clara said, her words trembling between anger and grief. "I didn't say she was," Ethan replied, weary. "She's there," Clara insisted. "That's where Ma slept." Malin felt the ground shift beneath her. She hadn't known. She had simply taken the empty bed nearest the wall, the one no one directed her away from. Ethan sighed. "Clara, no one is replacing your mother." Clara's voice broke. "Then why is she here?" Silence followed. Malin stepped inside before the question could fester. She bowed deeply. "I will move," she said. "Anywhere else? I didn't know." Clara stared at her, tears streaking her cheeks, torn between relief and shame. Ethan looked at Malin, then at the children. He made a decision. "No," he said. "You'll stay where you are." Malin's eyes widened slightly. "But you didn't do anything wrong," he said, his voice firm now. "This house has room. We'll learn how to share it." Samuel scoffed under his breath but said nothing. That night Malin did move anyway, just a little. She pushed her bed a few inches away from the wall, as if distance might ease the ghosts. Sleep did not come easily. She lay awake listening to the forest and the cabin, every creak sounding like judgment. Memories crept in uninvited, her former husband's averted gaze, her mother's silent tears, the doctor's shaking head. "Barren," the word echoed in the dark. A soft sound broke her thoughts, a quiet sob. She sat up. It came from Clara's bed. Malin hesitated. This was dangerous ground. Comfort could be mistaken for intrusion. Rejection would hurt less if she did nothing. But the sob came again, small and broken. She moved slowly, kneeling beside Clara's bed. "I won't touch you," she whispered. "I just want to listen." Clara's shoulders shook. "She used to brush my hair," she said into the darkness. "Every night." Malin swallowed. "Your mother must have loved you very much." Clara nodded, crying harder now. Malin sat there until the sobs eased, her hands folded in her lap, doing nothing, being nothing except present. When Clara finally slept, Malin returned to her bed, heart aching in a way she did not fully understand. From his place near the hearth, Ethan watched the entire scene without being seen. Something shifted in him then, not relief, not hope, but recognition. He had seen this kind of quiet endurance before. It was the same endurance that had kept him going after his wife died, when the forest was the only witness to his grief. Still, doubt lingered. He did not need another mouth to feed. He did not need complications. He certainly did not need to grow attached to someone the world had already deemed less than. But as he lay there listening to the even breathing of his children and the softer, careful breathing of the woman who had been sold for her failure, he wondered, for the first time in a long while, whether this broken household might not be beyond mending. And Malin, staring into the dark, wondered how long it would take before they realized she was not worth keeping. The storm came without warning, as mountain storms often do, quiet at first, then sudden and merciless. By midday, the sky darkened to the color of bruised steel, and the wind began to moan through the pines like something wounded. Snow followed, thick and fast, erasing paths, swallowing sound. The forest that had seemed calm and sheltering turned vast and hostile within minutes. Ethan had left early that morning to check his far timber line, the place where he marked trees for the next season's cutting. He planned to be back before noon. He always was. The children knew the routine. So when the hour passed and the cabin door did not open, unease crept in like cold through cracks in the wall. Samuel stood at the window, fists clenched. He should have been back. Melin heard the fear beneath the anger. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped beside him, careful not to crowd. Outside, the snow fell harder now, driven sideways by wind. "The forest is dangerous in storms," she said gently, "but your father is strong." "So was Ma," Samuel snapped, then immediately looked away. The words hung heavy. Melin did not answer. She understood grief well enough to know when silence was the only safe reply. An hour later, fear tipped into panic. Thomas began to cry quietly. Ruth clung to Clara, her small fingers digging into her sister's sleeve. Samuel paced like a trapped animal. "I'm going to look for him," he said suddenly, grabbing his coat. "You can't," Melin said. "You're a child." He rounded on her, eyes blazing. "Don't tell me what I am." The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. Melin felt the old instinct rise, the instinct to step back, to submit, to disappear. But this was different. Children were at risk. "If you go out there alone," she said, forcing steadiness into her voice, "you may not come back. Then what happens to them?" Samuel froze. For a moment, the boy he was flickered beneath the armor he wore. "I'll go," Melin said. Silence fell. Clara stared at her. "You'll get lost." "I won't," Melin replied. "I'll follow his tracks. He's heavy. He leaves marks even in snow." Samuel laughed bitterly. "You think Pa would want you risking yourself?" Melin met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "I think he would want his children safe." Before he could answer, she was already tying a scarf around her head, pulling on boots too big for her feet. She paused only long enough to kneel in front of the younger children. "I will come back," she said softly. "You must stay together. Keep the fire alive." She stepped into the storm. The cold struck her like a slap. Snow blinded her almost instantly, stinging her face, seeping into her clothes. The forest swallowed her in white and grey, the path disappearing beneath her feet. She moved slowly, deliberately, scanning the ground for signs, a broken branch, a deep footprint, anything. She found them at the edge of the timberline. Ethan's tracks were uneven now, dragging slightly. A fallen tree lay half buried in snow. Her heart hammered. "Ethan!" she shouted, her voice torn away by wind. No answer. She followed the trail downhill, her legs burning, lungs aching. Fear pressed in on her from all sides, but beneath it burned something else, determination sharp enough to hurt. She had been powerless too many times in her life. If she turned back now, she would be powerless again. She found him near the ravine. Ethan lay twisted against a rock, his leg pinned beneath a broken branch, blood dark against the snow. His face was pale, his breath shallow. "Ethan," she whispered, dropping to her knees beside him. His eyes fluttered open. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped. She almost laughed. "You don't get to decide that." She worked quickly, ignoring the pain in her fingers as she tried to free his leg. The branch was heavy, slick with ice. "I can't move it," she said, breathless. "You have to go back," he murmured. "The kids—" "I won't leave you," she said. The words came out fiercer than she expected. Using fallen stone as leverage, she wedged it beneath the branch. Straining with everything she had, muscles screamed. Something in her shoulder tore sharply, but she did not stop. With a cry, the branch shifted enough for Ethan to pull his leg free. He groaned, biting back pain. "We need to get you home," she said, already tearing strips from her scarf to bind his leg. The journey back was a blur of pain and will. She half-dragged, half-carried him, her body trembling, vision narrowing. More than once she nearly fell. Each time she forced herself upright. repeating one thought like a prayer, "Not here, not today." When the cabin finally emerged through the storm, she nearly collapsed with relief. Samuel threw the door open, eyes wide. "Pa!" The children swarmed them, crying, laughing, clinging. Melin eased Ethan onto the bed and stepped back, her legs giving way. She sat heavily on the floor, shaking. Ethan's injury was bad, but not fatal. The leg would heal slowly. As he drifted in and out of sleep, he caught Maylene's wrist. "Why?" he asked quietly. She looked down at him, snow still melting in her hair. "Because no one came for me," she said. "And I survived anyway." The days that followed were different. Samuel watched her now, really watched her. He saw the way she favored her injured shoulder, the way she still rose before dawn to cook. Clean, tend, never complaining. One evening, without a word, he set an extra blanket near her bed. Clara began to ask her to help braid her hair. Thomas brought her a carved wooden horse shyly, as if offering a treaty. Ruth climbed into her lap without asking, and Maylene, terrified of the fragile warmth growing around her, began to feel something she had buried long ago. Not hope, something quieter. A sense of being needed. Ethan healed slowly. During the long hours by the fire, he spoke more than he had in years. Of his wife, of the forest, of the loneliness that came after loss. One night as the children slept, he said, "You're not a burden." The words struck her like a blow. She bowed her head, unable to trust her voice. But even as the household began to knit itself together, shadows lingered. Melin knew how quickly belonging could be revoked. She had seen it happen before, and somewhere deep inside, fear whispered that this place, this fragile, hard-won warmth, could never truly be hers. Not when the world had already decided she was incomplete. The knock came just after dawn, hard, deliberate, and utterly out of place in a world that usually announced itself only through wind and birdsong. Melin froze mid-step, a bowl of porridge trembling in her hands. The sound echoed through the cabin like a gunshot, snapping the fragile peace they had begun to trust. Ethan looked up sharply from the bench where he sat, his injured leg stretched out before him. Samuel was already on his feet, instinctively moving in front of the younger children. Clara's eyes widened. Thomas dropped his spoon. Even Ruth seemed to sense the shift, crawling closer to Maylin without understanding why. No one ever came this far into the forest without a reason. Ethan rose slowly, gripping the table for balance. "Stay back," he told the children, his voice calm but edged with warning. Then he went to the door and opened it. A man stood outside, his coat too fine for logging work, his boots polished despite the snow-muddied path. His face was narrow, his eyes sharp and calculating. He smiled, but it didn't reach those eyes. "Ethan Hale," the man said. "Been a long time." Melin felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Jonah Briggs," he replied flatly. "What do you want?" Jonah's gaze drifted past Ethan, sweeping the cabin interior, lingering on the children, then settling on Melin. His smile sharpened. "Well now," he said, "looks like you've acquired yourself a woman." Melin instinctively lowered her eyes. She recognized that tone. She had heard it before, at markets, in her former husband's village, in places where men spoke of women as things to be weighed and judged. "She's part of this family," Ethan said. Jonah chuckled. "Family's a generous word." Samuel bristled. "Who are you?" Jonah crouched slightly to Samuel's level, his expression mocking. "An old friend of your pa's, someone who knows his secrets." Ethan's voice hardened. "Leave the children out of this." Jonah straightened, shrugging. "Fair enough. I'm here on business." Malin's heart pounded. Business had always meant danger. Jonah stepped inside without waiting for permission, brushing snow from his coat. "Word's spreading," he said casually, "about a woman brought up from the villages. Sold cheap. Barren, they say." The word struck Malin like a slap. Samuel turned to Ethan, confused. Clara stared at Maylene, her brows knitting together. Melin felt heat rush to her face, shame burning so fiercely she could barely breathe. "That's enough," Ethan snapped. Jonah raised his hands in mock surrender. "Easy, I'm not judging, just stating facts. Thing is, people are talking, and when people talk, officials listen." Ethan went still. "There are laws," Jonah continued smoothly, "about undocumented labor. about trafficking, about households, taking in women without proper papers. His eyes flicked to Maylene again. Especially women who can't contribute what society expects. Samuel's voice shook. What does that mean? It means, Jonas said, that if the wrong ears hear about her, she could be taken away. The room seemed to shrink around them. Maylene stepped forward before she could stop herself. I will go, she said quietly. I don't want trouble. No, Ethan said instantly. Jonas' smile widened. See, she understands. She's reasonable. Ethan turned on him, fury finally breaking through his restraint. You don't get to decide who stays under my roof. Jonah leaned closer. Then settle your debt. Silence. Meylin's breath caught. Debt? Ethan looked away. Jonah straightened, satisfied. Years ago when your wife was sick, you borrowed money for medicine. Promised timber in return. Then she died, the deal fell apart, and you disappeared deeper into the forest. He spread his hands. Debts don't vanish just because grief does. Samuel stared at his father, betrayal flickering across his face. Is that true? Ethan did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was low. Yes, Jonah nodded. So here's how this works. Either you pay me in timber this spring, more than you can afford, or I take the matter to the authorities. And they'll be very interested in her. Maylin felt the decision settle inside her like a stone. That night, long after Jonah had left, she packed her things. She folded her dress carefully, wrapped her scarf, tucked away the wooden horse Thomas had given her, then paused, heartbreaking, and placed it back on the shelf. It did not belong to her. Ethan found her by the door. You're not leaving, he said. I am, she replied softly. This is how it ends. It always is. You saved my life. She looked at him then, really looked. That doesn't buy me safety. The children gathered behind him, silent, frightened. Samuel stepped forward. If you go, it's because of us, isn't it? Maylin knelt in front of him. No, she said firmly. It's because some people only see what I lack, and I won't let that hurt you. Clara began to cry. Ruth clutched Maylin's sleeve. Even Samuel's eyes shone. Ethan's voice broke. If you walk out that door, you're proving them right, that you're disposable. Maylin stood slowly. Her hands shook, but her voice did not. I'm not disposable, she said. That's why I'm leaving on my own terms. She reached for the latch, and Ethan, faced with the same choice that had haunted him since his wife's death, silence or fight finally, spoke the words that would change everything. If you take her, he said quietly, you'll have to take me too. Maylin froze. The forest outside was still waiting. Ethan did not sleep that night. Neither did Maylin. The cabin, once a refuge of quiet routines and soft firelight, felt charged with something dangerous now, like a drawn bow waiting to release. Outside, the forest creaked and sighed beneath the weight of snow, indifferent to human fear. By morning, Ethan had made his decision. He wrapped his injured leg carefully, pulled on his coat, and gathered his papers, few as they were. Maylin watched from the hearth, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She had spent the night convincing herself she would leave before dawn. Yet here she was, still inside the walls she had tried so hard not to belong to. I'm going into town, Ethan said. Maylin's heart sank. That's what he wants. That's where he thinks he has power, Ethan replied. Which means that's where I'll take it back. Samuel straightened. I'm coming. No, Ethan said gently but firmly. You're staying here. Maylin stepped forward. Then I will go. Ethan shook his head. If you go alone, you're vulnerable. If you stay, you're protected. By what? She asked. Silence? He met her gaze. By truth. The road to town cut through the forest like a scar. Ethan walked with a cane, each step measured, pain etched into his face. Maylin walked beside him, the wind tugging at her scarf. She felt exposed. Every passing mile bringing her closer to the world that had already judged her. The town was small but loud, its streets alive with trade, gossip, and scrutiny. People stared as they passed, at Ethan's limp, at Maylin's foreign dress, at the way she walked half a step behind him. They went straight to the magistrate's office. Jonah Briggs was already there. Well, Jonah said, leaning back in his chair, boots propped on the desk. I wondered how long it'd take. Ethan ignored him and addressed the magistrate, a grey-haired man with tired eyes. "I'm here to settle a debt and to register my household properly." Jonah laughed. "Register her? With what credentials?" Melin felt her chest tighten. The room smelled of ink and damp paper, memories pressing in from all sides. "I don't have papers," she said quietly. "But I have witnesses." Jonah raised a brow. "Witnesses to what? Her usefulness?" Ethan slammed his hand on the desk. "Enough!" The magistrate held up a hand. "Let her speak." Melin swallowed. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. She spoke of her parents' poverty, of being returned by her husband, of the broker, of the price paid for her body, reduced because she could not conceive. She did not beg. She did not weep. She told the truth as plainly as she could. The room grew quiet. "She saved my life," Ethan said when she finished. "She keeps my household. She protects my children. If that doesn't earn her place, then take me with her." Jonah scoffed. "Sentiment doesn't override law." The magistrate leaned forward. "Nor does coercion override decency." Jonah's smile faltered. "I've received other complaints about you, Briggs," the magistrate continued. "Predatory lending, threats, intimidation." Jonah stood abruptly. "This is absurd." "Sit down," the magistrate said sharply. Outside, voices rose. People had gathered. News traveled fast in small towns. A woman sold for infertility. A widowed lumberjack standing against a broker. A household of children at risk. Samuel had disobeyed. He stood at the edge of the crowd. Clara and Thomas beside him, Ruth clutching his coat. His voice rang out high and clear. "She's our family!" The words cut through the murmurs. Clara stepped forward. "She tucks us in." Thomas held up a bandaged finger. "She fixed me." Ruth whispered, "She stays." The crowd shifted. The magistrate closed his eyes briefly, then spoke. "Ethan Hale, your debt will be reviewed. As for the woman Melin, you are granted provisional residence under his guardianship." Melin's knees nearly gave out. Jonah lunged forward. "You can't." "I can," the magistrate said coldly, "and I will." Outside, snow began to fall again, softer this time. On the walk home, no one spoke for a long while. Then Samuel broke the silence. "You didn't leave," he said to Melin, not accusing, astonished. She looked down at him. "I tried." He nodded once. "I'm glad you failed." That night, back in the cabin, the fire burned brighter than it had in weeks. The children laughed more easily. Ethan watched Melin move through the room, no longer shrinking, no longer apologizing for her presence. But as peace settled in, Melin felt something stir beneath it, a question she had been avoiding. If she was allowed to stay, what was she allowed to be? Spring arrived slowly in the forest, not with celebration but with quiet persistence. Snow retreated inch by inch, revealing damp earth and stubborn green shoots pushing through decay. The cabin breathed differently now. Windows stayed open longer. Laughter lingered. And still, Melin waited for the other ending, the one she had been trained to expect. Because safety had always been temporary. She woke one morning to find Ethan already outside, splitting wood despite his healing leg. She watched from the doorway, concern tightening her chest. "You shouldn't," she said. He paused, resting his weight on the axe. "I won't break." She nodded, though she had heard similar words before, from men who did break, and took others with them. Later that day, Clara asked her a question that pierced deeper than any insult ever had. "Why don't you ever talk about the baby you didn't have?" The room went still. Melin sat down slowly, hands folded in her lap. "Because I was taught that speaking of it was shameful." Samuel frowned. "That doesn't make sense." "It does," Melin said softly, "when your worth is measured by something your body refuses to do." The children listened, really listened, in the way adults rarely did. That night, after the younger ones slept, Ethan spoke. "You don't owe us motherhood," he said quietly. "You never did." She stared at the fire. "Everyone else believed I did. I lost my wife," he continued. "And for a long time, I thought that meant I'd lost the right to build anything new. I was wrong." She looked at him then, truly looked. Not as shelter, not as rescuer, as a man choosing her without conditions. "You don't need to give us children," he said. "You already gave us yourself." Something in Melin broke open, not loudly, not violently, But like ice releasing a river, it had held back for years. She cried without covering her face, without apologizing. The children did not watch from a distance. They came to her. Clara leaned against her shoulder. Thomas pressed his head into her side. Ruth climbed into her lap. Even Samuel rested his hand on her knee, awkward but sincere. In that moment, the word infertile lost its power. Weeks later, the village sent word, formal, official. Malin's residence was confirmed. Her name recorded. Her existence acknowledged not as a defect, but as a person. She read the paper slowly, hands steady. "That's it?" she asked. "That's it," Ethan said. She folded the document and placed it in the small wooden box beneath her bed, beside the scarf she had torn to save his life, beside memories she no longer needed to run from. Summer followed. The children grew louder. The cabin grew fuller. And one evening, as fireflies blinked in the clearing, Samuel said, "You know, you're already our mother." Malin smiled, not sadly, not fearfully, but with something like peace. "No," she said. "I am something else." "What?" Clara asked. "I am the woman who chose you," Malin replied, "and the woman you chose back." Years later, people would still whisper about the lumberjack who took in a barren woman. But inside the forest, inside that cabin, another story lived on, one where worth was not measured by blood, but by presence, by staying, by love that arrived quietly and refused to leave. And Maylene once sold for what she lacked, finally understood what she had always been: enough.